Hello, and again, welcome to Gaming, the podcast by Indie by Design. We hope that your brief wait between episodes has been a pleasant one. I am John Robertson, and I am to be joined, as usual, by Stace Harmon. His voice will be initiated soon. In this episode, we are talking about 2007's Portal and what makes it so great. Congratulations, your device has been processed and we are now ready to start the episode proper. Stand back. The episode will start in 3, 2, 1.
One of the things that I remember the most about the original Portal was the original release of Portal and how I first experienced it, because it felt like a surprise, and that doesn't happen very often, certainly not these days. It felt like a surprise launch, and that was part of the charm of it and of being blown away by it. Do you remember, was your first experience of it on launch? Was it something you came to later?
So I played it like most other people, I guess, via the orange box. And I bought it on Xbox 360, which, was for me and for a lot of other people, the dominant console of the time, dominant over the PlayStation 3. Orange box on Xbox 360 is how I played it. I can't remember if it was the first game I played, because I definitely bought it being excited for the episodic Half-Life 2. I can't remember if I played Portal before playing those. I probably didn't, because I was more excited about Half-Life. But I think say that Portal is the game of that Orange Box collection that has stayed with me the most, I guess. Certainly played the most number of, replayed the most number of times, thought about the most, is the most interesting, which is, I guess, why we're talking about about Portal now rather than Half-Life 2 episode 2, episode 1.
Handy,
yeah. So that's how I played it, and it has kind of catapulted itself to the top of that collection, which I guess is, well, it's not that surprising in hindsight because the game's excellent, but I suppose
it was at the time, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was almost included as a freebie, or certainly that's how.
Yeah,
I
almost like a
perceived it.
tech demo was how I saw it.
Yeah, here's this extra thing for you to try out once you've got through the main event, which was episode 2, because at that point that was the only way, or certainly the first way to experience episode 2, Half-Life 2, episode 2, was through the orange box. So that was it was like stealth marketing, and I'll have this extra thing, and then that, like you, it's the thing that I remember the most distinctly. Certainly, I mean, I don't, Half-Life 2 and episode 1 and episode 2 to an extent blur into one for me. I haven't played them, I haven't replayed them anywhere near the number of times that I've played Portal. And Team Fortress 2 I also put a lot of time into, but that was sort of a separate, obviously that was multiplayer only, that was a separate thing. That was sort of the incidental thing for me. I didn't expect to play that at all, but I ended up playing loads of it. But yeah, Portal I've been back to many times, and it's a fascinating piece of, well, it's a game, of course. It's a fascinating piece of software for many reasons, one of which is the way that it was launched, and it just doesn't feel like that happens these days. It was a long time ago, 13 years ago now. But
yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to maybe say that Portal, of the games included in the Orange Box, Portal has, and a lot of people might disagree with this because Half-Life has a lot of fans, but Portal has the best character in GLaDOS. It has the best weapon in the portal gun. It has the best environment in Aperture Labs. It has the best gameplay with the Portal concept. I think on most levels that games are typically kind of popularly critiqued through and thought about and discussed, I think I would be on the side of arguing that Portal probably has the best of all of those things versus anything else in that collection.
So Portal better than Half-Life. There you go. That's official.
Yeah, there you go.
That's we should be asking for a Portal 3, not a Half-Life 3. Forget it.
Well, that's
the other thing. Like Portal 2. So I prefer Portal to Portal 2 on a personal preference level. I understand that Portal 2 is a more accomplished. I mean, it's a far bigger game, of course, but it's a more accomplished game. The design is far more detailed, but I prefer the original over the second one. I think because it was more of a surprise thing. It was more of a an out of the blue kind of launch, and it also, a bit like Arkham Asylum versus Arkham City, that self-contained thing really worked for me. That the constraints with which you were under in Portal, and those got a lot looser in Portal 2. I think, I just prefer the environment and the narrative of that environment.
Yeah, because I think Portal 2 is more accomplished. It takes the puzzles further. It's got the multiplayer. But by that point, the Portal gimmick, the concept has already, like, it's not new to you anymore. So that like that sort of like bias of the new, that excitement of the new, is kind of muted in Portal 2 because Portal 1 has kind of introduced, it's like, you always love your first child more than the second one. I assume, having no children.
As a person with 2 children, I couldn't possibly one of whom it's their birthday today. I couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah. And you're doing a podcast instead of celebrating her birthday. It shows you which one you love more.
It is the second child's birthday.
I mean, the game Portal 1, I think, ends, because I'm a little bit different, because I think the bit different from your opinion, and that while I do agree that Portal 1 is the more interesting game, and it's probably the more memorable one because it is the one that introduces you to the Portal concept, I think the game definitely doesn't outstay its welcome, which you could say is a good thing, but I would have liked to have seen more levels, because the game's never very hard. Like, it never challenges you that much. And I mean, going back and playing it again in preparation for this, I mean, I did the whole game in like an hour and a half or something. And that wasn't rushing it. That was like, trying to indulge all the lines of dialogue and everything. And obviously I've played it before, so it's amazing how much you kind of remember. Like, you just remember immediately what the solution is to stuff, or very quickly. Anyway, well, it's actually remember the solution. It's that you're very au fait with like the Portal mechanics and what can be achieved.
Attuned. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're attuned to how it works, and I think that's also indicative of the design, that the early test chambers are very prescriptive. I mean, you could argue a lot of the game is quite prescriptive, but the early test chambers are very prescriptive. And once you've done those, you just know how it works immediately. There's no getting your head around it. You just go back to it, and it does just it falls back into place.
Yeah.
And the way it teaches you how to play the game is that again is a testament to that it's teaching you how to play the game whilst you're playing the game, instead of having this separate tutorial nonsense of press this button to jump and this button to move forward. It's just like do this as part of a puzzle instead of do this as a separate walled off area. So
because it does have that. It does have a very strong tutorial segment that you could argue is like half the game, really. And it does get you to do just menial tasks. Put box on the button, press this button, like, pick up this gun or whatever. Like but it's all worked into the narrative. It's all worked into the dialogue. So even though you're just being handheld through these sections, you kind of want to just go with it, because the story and the characterization of the setting, I suppose, really, the Aperture Labs being an institution, is so good. But I would say that I do wish the game had a few more levels, a few more challenging levels towards the end, because it is
as part of the you'd like that as part of the narrative, because there are the separate test chambers, or rather the test chambers are still the same, but you do them under different conditions. So it's not so much a difficulty level thing, like going back and challenging yourself to work this out in the fewest number of steps or portals or in the shortest amount of time. That isn't as appealing to you. You'd rather it was like just a slightly longer game with
just maybe like a few more test chambers before you get to obviously the final showdown, and you break out of your side of the curtain and you go onto the other side of the curtain, and the whole you're bringing down GLaDOS, you're bringing down the testing concept, you're going against the machine sort of thing, before it gets to that final boss battle, maybe. So a few more test chambers, because the bit where you go past the test chambers and you see behind the curtain, and now you're in the back area where you can see all the pistons moving and the platforms going up and down and stuff. That stuff's good, and like I really do like it, but I think the game is at its very best in the test chambers. Like the bits behind the scenes are interesting, but they're less I don't know, maybe because they're less directed, maybe because it's less. I found myself a lot of in a lot of the stuff and behind the scenes is you're really just searching for where you can shoot a portal versus actually like a complicated puzzle.
Yeah, I think, but narratively, I like that because it isn't really very contrived in the way that a lot of games are, where it's like, oh, you have to get this key, but this key just happens to be really bizarrely behind these 17 different puzzles. When you go to the behind the scenes stuff, like Resident Evil, when you go to the behind the scenes stuff, it's like you are just trying to get out, and it's like this hasn't been set up in order to be difficult. It hasn't been set up to bamboozle you in any way. It's just like, well, how do you get out? It's like more of an organic feel. Yeah, it's more of an improvised feel than like the actual test chambers, and that, everything it's so incredibly consistent throughout in terms of writing and narrative and its own internal logic that I forgive it for that. But I do know what you mean. Like, it's not, once you're at that point, there's not a lot of puzzling to be done. There's more just like, I wonder if actually I've just one of the notes written down is about how the game kind of institutionalizes you, and that you do in the sense that unless you do exactly what GLaDOS says, unless you do exactly as instructed, you just can't progress. Like, you can't do anything. You have to shoot a portal here, you have to pick up that box, you have to put the box on the button or whatever, or exactly what she says, or you literally can't do anything. There's no way around it. You can't like go and do a side mission. You can't say, oh, stuff the story, I'm just going to do my own thing. Like, you can't, like, no way. You are essentially a prisoner to her demands. Like, you have to go through and be this lab rat. You can't that's it at the end. So I wonder if I've just become incredibly institutionalized to the point where I don't even want to. I just want more of the pre-described pathways and then the set solutions to puzzles. I'm scared of you just shoot a thing over there to find an exit. Oh, actually, I just want to go back to my safe, secure bubble. Well, exactly, and in that way of being institutionalized, like that notion of relinquishing control, there is a certain comfort in that. If you and that's how people become institutionalized, I guess, and be that in the various forms, just even in a job or in prison or wherever else. That there is, if you can relinquish control, then you are likely to have an easier time of it. Not necessarily a better time. Not it's not better for your personal liberty, but you're going to have an easier, more comfortable time of it. And that's something actually that I went back and looked at. I've got the Sacrifice like graphic novels that were put out as a hardback book by Valve, and one of them is a Portal. Well, it's a Portal 2 comic actually, but it deals with the Portal storyline and then goes on to Portal 2. And in that's one of the things that is talked about, that the reason that Shell is chosen by the guy that escaped, the guy who's like scrawlings you see everywhere.
Yeah, the cake is a lie guy.
The reason he tries to help her is because her test, apparently, it wasn't that she was the most intelligent or the most athletic or anything like that. The reason he tries to help her is because she had the highest tenacity. She was the most tenacious. She was the most stubborn, and refused to be institutionalized. Always believed that there was another way, even when seemingly there wasn't, even when it is just stick a box on this button. She was always the one that was looking for a different way out. And so in terms of the trials, she's considered to be like not suitable because she's just too much of a pain in the ass, basically. Like, she's not a good test subject. But in terms of the narrative, it works really well, because that's, she doesn't just assume the party recovery position, as I think it's called in the game, and lie down on the floor. She tries to escape and does escape. And even in that, you don't even really have any choice in that, unless you die and it's game over. Like, there is no...
If you're role-playing it, that the first time you die, it's just have to start again.
I'm dead. That's, you can do an Iron Man of Portal. So clearly the narrative and the game mechanics fit very well together.
like beautifully together, and it sort of transcends most. I'm trying to think of other puzzle games that manage to transcend the puzzle game genre in the same way, because it's very rare for a puzzle game to hit people as hard through its narrative as it does through its just puzzle solving mechanics. And like as you were saying, the narrative, and there's like very little dissonance between the narrative and the game mechanics. Like they are in symbiosis. They buff each other. They help inform, and they help validate, and they help empower one another. They're not, in a lot of puzzle games, it's they don't even try to blend the narrative and the actual interactions that you're having. They are completely two separate complete entities, whereas in this they are one and the same sort of prospect.
And it would be easy to look at that and say, well, that's because, as in a lot of video games, the writing gets done at the end, and there's that sort of a layer over the top. But the same thing really happened with this as well, because Portal wasn't always Portal. It was this student project, Narbacular Drop. So it did exist. It's not like those two things were developed side by side. It wasn't always the puzzles and the game mechanic and the writing started at the same time and just constantly commingled and kind of influenced each other. It did exist as a puzzle game before it existed as a narrative experience. So it's not even like an easy answer of just that's what happens when you start writing at the same time as you start designing, because that wasn't the case. So I mean, it is something of an anomaly, and it makes me happy that it exists, and it exists in the same universe as Half-Life to some extent, because there's talk of Black Mesa and Aperture Science going side by side in some of the slides that you see when you're behind the scenes. And it kind of makes me sad that there just isn't more of it. Like, what Valve could have done, or could still do, I guess, with that whole universe is clearly there's incredible things to be done there. And when they still regularly made games, they made some incredible games. And it's a shame that there aren't more of them coming.
I mean, on the Portal side of that, I'm of the opinion that Portal probably needs to be kept as its own entity, separate from Half-Life. Like, they can cross over story and be in the same world and share all of that stuff, but I mean, in gameplay, in direct terms, I don't think, for example, you could have the portal gun in Half-Life, because it would just, like, why would you do anything other than just portal around? Like, it would totally break the whole, like, you'd have to redesign the whole game so that you knew that players could go literally anywhere they wanted, whenever they wanted. Not, you can go to this part of the map, you can go to, but you can go to that part of the map in 1 second, not like all this time to get, you don't have to, otherwise that a player has to travel through that corridor, or that corridor, so you can present them with with whatever key piece of information they need or whatever. But with a portal gun, you don't. You can just do whatever you want. So it would literally break.
But it doesn't. See, I think the thing though with that is that there's like, isn't there some equivalence? There's and you'll know this better than I will, but there's like a teleport spell or a teleport piece of equipment you can get in Divinity 2 that kind of does the same thing, that it, not to the same extent as the portal gun would in a Half-Life game, but that you can, what I suppose would be considered cheesing some of the puzzles by just teleporting from one place to another. And the thing, and that sort of then puts me onto like D&D, that there are spells in D&D that in Dungeons and Dragons you can get spells that effectively would be considered to break the game, but it's kind of how you use them. And I'd like to see the portal gun, and even like a character like Superman. Like, Superman basically breaks everything because, well, he's just all powerful. So why doesn't he become a god? And I'd like to see the portal gun then, like, it then fit into a game, and it's like, well, here are all the reasons. Yes, you can blip from here to here, but here's the reasons why you might not want to. Or here, if you do that, these are the consequences, and how that might be handled. And, And people would still then finish the game in 5 seconds, perhaps, but others would like, well, what more does this mean? Like, how can I explore it? So that would be
So I guess what I mean by game breaking in something like Half-Life isn't like, I think you're right. I think you can make it work, and there is an interesting experience to be had by bringing the portal gun into a more open setting. Doesn't even need to be open world, just a long level. But I guess what I mean by break the game is that it would completely change what Half-Life is. Completely change it. It would take away. It would be Half-Life in name and character and setting, but it wouldn't be Half-Life in gameplay anymore. It would be a completely different. So that's what I mean by it. Like it would be a whole new thing. It wouldn't.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see a patch where you just drop the portal gun into different shooters, and it's just like games that were never designed to have the portal gun in them, but just drop it into, and even multiplayer games, or drop it into Team
like
Fortress
Street
or
Fighter.
Apex, or
it's like portal gunning behind.
Dowsing can do
that.
That's
true. Yeah,
you can go from one place to another. But yeah, just drop it into a game and like, there you go. Here's a Christmas present. Have a portal gun for a couple of weeks and just see
F1 2020. Oh, there we go. I've done the whole race in 0.1 seconds.
That's how Hamilton keeps winning. And just see it, like the amount of creativity that would come out of that. Put it in Shadow of the Colossus, that would be amusing. Like the amount of stuff that would come out of having a portal gun in different games, not by design, but like very deliberately just go nuts, I think could be like, that could be a real community thing where so many people find so many different amazing ways of using it. Yeah. But I agree, as a design concept, like using it in a game, for sure, it could, you have a lot less direct control over what a player's doing if you can let them go from one place to another in half a second.
I suppose to bring it back to Portal, I suppose the interesting thing about all of that time we've just spent talking about how it could be applied in other games, what it really shows, I guess, is just how interesting and just how good and how original and how different the concept is. Like the portal gun concept is just such a powerful thing, and I think maybe that just goes unsaid or doesn't get said enough because it's such an obvious bit of the game. It's it's kind of easy to overlook, but alongside the story and the institutionalization of around how the narrative works to institutionalize you, all of that stuff, at its core, like the game, the portal gun is just such an incredible design choice, design invention. Like it's totally like, yes, there are somewhat equivalents in other games where you can teleport here and there, but the freedom of just being able to fire portals off wherever you want, like because it's in that just immediate gratification from it. It's still got that shooter element of you shoot and you see an instant reaction base. Like you're not waiting for something. It's not turn based. You don't have to wait for the thing to recharge. Like it's still got that, even though it's a puzzle game and it's cerebral and all that, it's still got that instant gratification. It's still kind of moment to moment, even though it's not a shooter.
And I think that's why it's so important that it is a gun. I think that's why it gets so much from being a gun, not a portal. Watch, not you put this thing down here and put this other thing down here.
That sounds like something in like
or a torch,
Digimon
or like it's a gun which comes, no pun intended, loaded with subtext. But what you're firing is you're not firing bullets, you're firing freedom. How about that?
Yeah,
I've coined a thing.
There you go, good.
Portal 3, you're firing freedom.
Because I think that's what sets it apart, and that's what makes it different from, because you're right, in say Divinity or other games that use kind of those open-ended sort of systems, you can cheese a lot of the stuff, but in that game, like it's known, it's part of the design, it's okay, but it's also turn-based, and you have cooldowns and you have limitations on where and how you can use that stuff. You can't just willy-nilly just fire it left, right and center. Like you can't experiment with it in the same way as you can with a portal gun, not as quickly, not as in not as such great quantity in such a small amount of time. So I'm struggling to think of like, is there a better gun in games than a portal gun? Like what gun's more powerful than that? Like what like, you know, you could solve, like, it just makes a mockery of all other guns in game. Like, it's so much more powerful. Surely I can't, like, the gravity gun in Half-Life is not as powerful, even though it is powerful. It's not as powerful. That's an interesting thing. They went from gravity, messing around with gravity in Half-Life, to then like portals and, let's say, like wormholes, I guess, in Portal. So what's, you know, maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe that's why they haven't done Half-Life or Portal, Half-Life 3 or Portal 3, because they're working on whatever the next Einstein theory is.
Bending, the space-time continuum. Yeah. And so again, like you, I replayed it recently, and aside from the obvious design stuff that we've touched on so far, and the narrative stuff, but I think it's one of the things it felt like was like a Black Mirror episode before there was Black Mirror. It felt like the subtext and again at the very end where you square off against GLaDOS, and again in this sacrifice collection of graphic novels that I've got, it talks about what happened before that. It talks about how GLaDOS had this conscience core, effectively this moral core, and that's one of the first things that you burn when you fight her. But how the sort of the big science view of that was that we'll just give her this one component that will stop her or stop it. I mean, it's not a her. It doesn't, you know. It's not
no. It's just,
But still, it's
amazing how easily we're guided into thinking of masculine and feminine just through the tone of voice.
Yeah, and so she nonetheless. It was the big science view was just, well, we'll give her this thing and that will stop her from misbehaving. And there was jokes around like, oh, how quickly she tries to kill people once that's switched off. And there's this whole notion that the way that she was created, narratively, the way that she was created, they know that this isn't a good thing. They're just doing it because they can do it. It's like, well, and I think there's a line in the song at the end that says that we do what we must because we can. And it's like, well, that sums it up, really. It's like this imperative to do something, but only because we can do it. We've got no real practical application for this thing beyond, well, we're clever, so let's do it. And that's,
well, yeah, but I also think isn't that kind of, that's also science in a way, isn't it? That's like pure science rather than science for an agenda. Just like humanity likes to go out and just, you know, explore, adventure, throw whatever it is at the wall and, you know, see what happens. Just that's one way to find new stuff, I suppose. Like just try everything.
Yeah, and you end up with a killer robot. That's cool. Yeah. So have we addressed why Portal is so great? I mean, we've certainly touched on a lot of the things.
Well, I think all of these
make it great. These are all reasons for sure. So is there one distinguishing? Is there, like, if you were going to recommend Portal or even describe Portal, but if you were going to recommend Portal to somebody that hadn't played it, what would be the key things? Oh, you should really play Portal because. Not his half an hour's worth of reasons why, but, you know, a couple of sort of bullet point reasons. What would be your personal sort of top picks?
Well, I mean, despite me kind of going on about the portal gun and stuff, I would have that in there, but it'd probably be my second point. So, but I think the thing that sticks with me most about the game, and the thing that I'd use to introduce it to other people, is the narrative. It is that the idea that you play a prisoner / test subject, and there's this faceless company, you know, sort of framed through this weird sort of sadistic robot, and like you're trying to break out and you're trying to, you know, you literally sort of like break the shackles of your imprisonment by at first going along with it, but then breaking out of the system. And the way that they flip that switch between being on one side of the fence to the other side of the fence, and, you know, the payoff of the whole narrative and all that stuff is just brilliantly done. So I guess that's how I'd introduce it to someone and say it's great for these narrative and these sort of philosophical and these sort of social questions. And it's also got a great puzzle mechanic that, you know, that helps build all of that narrative stuff.
I think I would, and I'd be much the same. I think I would possibly, unless asked directly, I think I would possibly even avoid or omit the fact that it's a puzzle game, because I think that comes loaded with a lot of subtext for a lot of people. So some people might immediately feel like, oh, I'm no good at puzzles. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I feel stupid. And it's like, well, and no amount of, well, you really won't, because you are guided through it in a way that, you know, I guess it's akin to the kind of level design that you see in Mario games, or certainly the older Mario games. Like, you learn stuff without even realizing that you're being taught it, and you're putting it into direct practical application, and then before you know it, it's kind of gone. Like that kind of idea is gone.
I think that's a good point, actually, because a lot of other puzzle games, they ask you to do things that are very abstract. They don't really bear much resemblance to what your eyes and your ears, what your senses will tell you. And whilst, yes, the Portal concept is very like futuristic and otherworldly and sci-fi, it's very easy. Like, we understand it innately. As soon as you see those portals and you look into one portal and you can see yourself through the other portal, like, you know immediately what that means. You know exactly how that works. So I guess, it doesn't feel like a puzzle game because you're working with things that are kind of immediately understandable through your human senses, rather than something very abstracted, and you have to go through a learning process to even be able to engage with it properly. Thanks for listening. That was what makes Portal so great. We'll be back again next Thursday, so make sure you're subscribed to keep up to date. It would also be fantastic if you could just take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really does enormously help when it comes to getting in front of more people and expanding our audience. Also, you can follow us on social media. We're at Indie by Design. That's at Indie by Design on all platforms. And take a moment to check out our website, indiebydesign.net. On the site, you can check out all the books that we've currently released, all of which are based around video games. And you can also take advantage of the pre-order bonuses we're currently running for 20 Double Fine years, which is our big book of all things Double Fine, covering everything from Psychonauts to Psychonauts 2, Brutal Legends to Grim Fandango Remastered, and literally everything in between. Again, the website, indiebydesign.net. All the best, and we'll see you again next time.